John's life takes a dark turn when he seeks wealth through a dangerous ritual, promising untold riches but with an unimaginable cost. As he embraces his newfound fortune, he starts to realize that the price of power is far steeper than he ever imagined. Each night, he locks himself away, but what happens behind closed doors is more horrifying than he can comprehend. With every passing day, his humanity slips away, leaving only a beast in his place. Now, as his terrifying transformation intensifies, John must face the chilling truth of what he has become before it's too late. John was the eldest of 3 children born to Madam Gloria and her hard-working husband. The family, though not wealthy, enjoyed a modest and content life. John's father worked as a cook on a white man's ship, spending 2 weeks at sea and the following 2 weeks at home with his family. His return always brought joy, as he would bring food and other supplies from the ship. John was known for his kindness and good manners, earning him the admiration of neighbors and relatives alike. His siblings adored him, and he was the pride of his parents. However, their peaceful life was about to take an unexpected and tragic turn. One Monday morning, John's father prepared to leave for work. The family gathered to see him off, helping him pack and wishing him a safe journey. Madam Gloria handed him a bag of snacks, and John helped carry his luggage. As he hugged his children and kissed his wife goodbye, no one imagined it would be their last moment together. On his way to the dock, disaster struck. A speeding truck lost control and crashed into his car. The accident was fatal, and he died before anyone could render help. By evening, news of his death reached Madam Gloria. The loss shattered the family. Madam Gloria collapsed upon hearing the news, and John, along with his younger siblings, was overwhelmed with grief. Their once lively home turned into a place of mourning. The community too was heartbroken, as John's father had been a beloved figure. A few days later, the captain of the ship visited the family. Touched by their plight, he gave Madam Gloria 30 million naira to help support her and the children. This gesture, meant to secure their future, instead became a source of their downfall. At first, Madam Gloria expressed her gratitude and promised to use the money wisely. She spoke about starting a business and ensuring her children received a good education. But soon, her focus shifted. She purchased a luxury car, claiming it was essential for her new lifestyle. Madam Gloria began attending extravagant parties, drawing the attention of a man who became her lover. Her priorities changed, and she started spending recklessly, leaving her children in a struggling public school. The family moved to a more expensive house, but rumors about her affair and her extravagant lifestyle spread through the neighborhood. Within a year, the money was gone. Madam Gloria had squandered it all on frivolous purchases and her lover, who eventually left her. Desperate for cash, she sold her car, but instead of using the proceeds to rebuild their lives, she continued her reckless habits. The family was forced to leave their home and relocate to a small apartment in a poor neighborhood. John and his siblings dropped out of school, their futures dimmed by their mother's poor choices. In an attempt to survive, Madam Gloria started a small plantain selling business. Every day, she would arrange the plantains on a tray, and John would carry it on his head, walking through the streets to sell them. Despite his hard work, the income was barely enough to feed the family. Madam Gloria grew increasingly bitter, and her frustrations were often directed at John. She blamed her misfortunes on spiritual forces, refusing to take responsibility for her actions. Her friends, who had once surrounded her, abandoned her, leaving the family in isolation. John, burdened by his mother's decisions, resolved to fight for a better life. Despite the overwhelming challenges, he was determined to rise above their circumstances and protect his siblings, holding on to hope for a brighter future. John, a young boy carrying the heavy burden of responsibility, would often return home with unsold plantains in his tray. Every time this happened, his mother, Madam Gloria, would lash out at him in a fit of rage. "Lazy boy! After wasting your day playing around, this is what you come back with? Unsold goods? You should be ashamed of yourself." Her angry words echoed through their small home, leaving John feeling defeated and unloved. Madam Gloria's scolding didn't end with words. She would strike him while berating him, adding to his pain. John, though young, could feel the sting of unfairness. He often cried himself to sleep, wondering why his own mother treated him so harshly. What had he done to deserve such treatment? Night after night, these unanswered questions haunted him, leaving him lost in a sea of sadness. As time passed, life became increasingly difficult for John. Madam Gloria's temper worsened, and her bitterness seemed to grow with each passing day. Yet John held on, silently enduring her wrath, hoping that one day things would change. One cool evening, a loud commotion erupted in their small community. Voices filled with excitement rang out, and curious neighbors rushed outside to see what was happening. It was Samwel, the son of their neighbor Lydia, who had just returned from the city. Samwel's arrival was nothing short of grand. He stepped out of a shiny new car, throwing crisp naira notes into the air. His friends accompanied him, all dressed in expensive clothes and flashy jewelry. Lydia danced joyfully in front of her son, her face glowing with pride as the neighbors cheered and scrambled for the falling money. Madam Gloria stood at a distance, watching the scene unfold. From her corridor, she observed Samwel, a boy she had known since childhood, now transformed into a man of wealth and influence. A wave of jealousy washed over her. She wished she could be in Lydia's place, basking in the pride and joy of a successful son. Despite her envy, Madam Gloria joined the crowd, congratulating Lydia with forced enthusiasm. But as the night wore on, she couldn't shake her thoughts. Samwel's sudden wealth puzzled her. She remembered how poor Lydia's family had been not long ago. How had Samwel become so rich after just a few years in the city? Over the following days, Madam Gloria grew more bitter and angry. She took out her frustrations on John, constantly comparing him to Samwel. "Look at you," she would sneer. "Do you think Samwel has two heads? He's not even much older than you, yet he's so successful. He just bought his mother a car. And you, all you do is play, eat, and get fat. If you continue wasting your life." The comparisons stung, but John remained quiet. Deep down, he longed for a chance to prove himself, to make his mother proud. Driven by desperation and envy, Madam Gloria hatched a plan. She decided to approach Lydia and ask her to convince Samwel to take John back to the city. "Please, my friend," Madam Gloria pleaded, "let Samwel take John with him. He can teach him the secrets of his success so he can support his siblings and help us out of this poverty." Lydia smiled warmly and reassured her. "Don't worry, Gloria. Just get John ready. I'll talk to Samwel. I'm sure he'll take him along." Madam Gloria's heart swelled with hope. She rushed home to share the news with John. "You'll be going to the city with Samwel," she told him, her voice filled with determination. "He'll show you how to succeed, and you'll make something of yourself. You'll help your siblings and take care of this family." John was both nervous and excited. The thought of leaving home and going to the city filled him with wonder. He imagined a future where he could earn enough money to lift his family out of poverty. Though uncertain about what lay ahead, he was eager to prove himself. The following week, as promised, Samwel agreed to take John with him. When the day arrived, John hugged his younger siblings tightly and bid them farewell. Madam Gloria watched as Samwel's car drove away, her heart a mix of hope and anxiety. As they entered the bustling city, John was overwhelmed by the sights and sounds. The towering buildings, the endless stream of cars, and the bright lights were unlike anything he had ever seen. Samwel's lifestyle was even more astonishing. He lived in a luxurious apartment, wore designer clothes, and commanded respect wherever he went. But beneath the surface, John began to sense that not everything was as it seemed. There were whispers about Samwel's sudden rise to wealth, rumors that hinted at a dangerous and unethical path. John's excitement slowly gave way to unease as he realized that his journey to success might come with a price he wasn't prepared to pay. Little did John know, his decision to follow Samwel to the city would lead him down a path that would change his life forever, a path filled with challenges, choices, and lessons that would test his strength and character. When Samwel welcomed John into his home, he was greeted with a strange discovery. Samwel's residence was far from the quiet, peaceful life John had imagined. Instead of a traditional household, the house was filled with young men who appeared to be in a constant state of busy work. Phones and computers were everywhere, and the hum of activity was palpable. As soon as Samwel entered the room, they all stopped their tasks and greeted John warmly, making him feel somewhat at ease despite the strange surroundings. That evening, Samwel sat down with John to explain the rules of the household and, more importantly, the secret behind his newfound wealth. With a smirk crossing his face, Samwel told John that his success was not due to hard work in the traditional sense. Instead, he had discovered a way to scam wealthy individuals out of their money. He explained that if John was willing, he would teach him the exact methods he used to make money so quickly, allowing John to achieve the same level of success. "How do you think I was able to buy this big house and these fancy cars within 2 years?" Samwel asked, his smile widening as he looked at John. "It wasn't by working a regular job, that's for sure." John sat there in silence for a moment. The path Samwel was offering was the complete opposite of everything he had expected. He had hoped for a chance to earn money through hard work and perseverance, but here was Samwel, showing him a way that seemed easy, albeit questionable. Despite the moral implications, John knew deep down that he was desperate to escape his life of poverty and to help his family. His mother especially had been struggling for so long. He felt he had no choice but to follow Samwel's advice, even if it meant stepping into an unfamiliar and potentially dangerous world. And so, Samwel began to teach John the tricks of the trade, how to manipulate and deceive wealthy individuals into parting with their money. John, though skeptical at first, grew more excited as he saw the possibilities. The idea of living a life of luxury like Samwel was too appealing to resist. Yet, there was more to this world than John had realized, and soon he began to see the darker side of it. As the days passed, John worked hard at learning the scam techniques, but things weren't going as smoothly as he had hoped. The rich targets he was supposed to deceive were not as easily fooled as he had been led to believe. Despite his best efforts, the results were underwhelming. Nothing seemed to work, and he became increasingly frustrated. Meanwhile, Samwel, who appeared to be doing little work himself, was spending large sums of money without any visible effort. Every night, he and his friends would hit the nightclub where they threw money around carelessly, surrounded by women fawning over them. The carefree lifestyle Samwel led seemed to have no end, yet John's attempts to replicate that success were faltering. Soon, John began to notice the pattern. While he was struggling to make any real progress, Samwel and his friends continued to live lavishly, throwing money around without concern. John felt a deep sense of frustration and confusion. Why was Samwel's wealth so effortless, while his own attempts at success were constantly falling short? The disparity between the two began to gnaw at him, and John couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As time went on, the pressure from his mother back home grew unbearable. "John, have you forgotten us?" she would cry out over the phone. "Your siblings are out of school, and even getting food on the table is a struggle. When are you going to send us money?" Her words struck at John's heart, and he felt an immense weight of guilt. He had promised her that he would send money home as soon as he could, but despite all his efforts, he hadn't been able to send even a small sum. His mother's constant complaints only added to his sense of failure. "You're just like Samwel, right? Why can't you be like him? Just last month he bought his mother a house, and yet you can't even afford a bicycle. You're a disgrace." She would scold him, her words cutting through his resolve. The constant comparisons between him and Samwel made John feel smaller and smaller. He wasn't succeeding the way he had hoped, and his mother seemed to think he was just lazy and incompetent. Her harsh words became a daily reminder of his struggles, and the pressure to send money home intensified. On top of all that, John became a sort of joke among the other young men in Samwel's house. Since he wasn't making money like they had expected, he was relegated to doing all the menial chores. He woke up early every morning to clean the house and wash their dirty clothes. This, he thought bitterly, was not why he had come to the city. He had left his village with the hope of earning money to support his family, not to become a servant in someone else's lavish home. As the days turned into weeks, John's frustration only grew. He had come to the city with dreams of success, but instead he was stuck in a vicious cycle of disappointment and humiliation. Yet, despite everything, he was determined. He had to make it work. He couldn't let his mother's sacrifices be in vain. He had to find a way out of this mess, no matter what it took. The feeling of being stuck in this lifestyle, working tirelessly without reward, gnawed at John's resolve. But still, the thought of the wealth and success that Samwel had so easily obtained kept him going. Somewhere deep down, John knew that the road to success wasn't going to be easy. But he was willing to do whatever it took to turn things around, no matter how far down the wrong path he had to go. John was in a state of utter dejection. For months he had followed Samwel's advice, adhering to every detail of the scam scheme he was taught, yet nothing had changed. Every night he stayed up, furiously typing away on his laptop, trying to convince wealthy individuals to part with their money. Yet all he had received were a couple of iTunes cards, sums that seemed like fortunes at first, but ultimately amounted to nothing. His frustration was growing, and he had no real answers, no tangible results to show for his efforts. That evening, John felt a mixture of fear and determination. The time had come to confront Samwel, to ask the question that had been gnawing at him for months. Why? He wasn't sure how Samwel would react, but he had to know why things weren't working out for him. He had seen the life Samwel was living, luxurious, carefree, and he couldn't help but feel like he was missing something. So, with a heavy heart, he approached Samwel. "Boss," John began cautiously, his voice low but steady. "I've been here for months now, and I still have nothing to show for it. I've followed everything you've told me, but none of it has worked. I've been up all night trying to defraud these wealthy people, but none of them are responding. The best I've gotten are a couple of iTunes cards, big sums, but still, they're nothing. I don't understand why it's not working for me." You're not working half as hard as I am, but you seem to have endless wealth. Please tell me, what am I doing wrong? What's the secret to your success?" He spoke from a place of desperation, his eyes filled with both frustration and a deep yearning for answers. He was determined to break through this wall of failure, to find out how Samwel was succeeding when he had been struggling. Samwel was silent for a long time. He sat back in his chair, deep in thought, his face inscrutable. John waited in silence, anxiety building up within him. Finally, Samwel broke the silence, his voice calm but cryptic. "My boy, don't worry," Samwel said, a soft smile creeping across his face. "Just keep pressing on. One day, you'll make a fortune. It's all about persistence." John felt a twinge of doubt, but decided to hold on to Samwel's words. He had no choice but to keep pushing forward, hoping that somehow, someday, his efforts would pay off. He continued following Samwel's instructions, even though the results were still elusive. Every December, when they returned to the village, John's mother would ask him the same question, the question that always made him feel like a failure. "Why are you still broke? You've been with Samwel all this time. Why isn't your life changing? Why aren't you sending money home?" John would try to explain, trying to make his mother understand that making money wasn't as easy as she thought, that he was working hard, but nothing was happening. But his explanations fell on deaf ears. His mother would scold him, calling him lazy, comparing him to Samwel. "Isn't it the same work you're both doing?" she would say with frustration in her voice. "Just last month, Samwel bought a house for his mother, and here you are telling me stories. You can't even afford a bicycle. What's wrong with you?" Her harsh words stung, and they dug deeper into John's sense of inadequacy. Every year he returned to the same place, stuck, struggling, and empty-handed. It was as if the world was moving on while he remained frozen in place. 3 years passed, and John's situation had barely improved. He was still just as broke as the day he had arrived at Samwel's house. His frustration had reached its peak. One evening, after another day of failure, John couldn't hold it in any longer. With tears in his eyes and his heart heavy with hopelessness, he fell to his knees in front of Samwel. "Boss, I'm tired of being broke," he pleaded, his voice shaking. "I've been here for 3 years now, and I have nothing to show for it. In that time, you've bought multiple houses in Lagos. You live like a king, but I'm still here, stuck. Please, tell me the secret to your success. I want to be like you." For a long moment, Samwel didn't say anything. He simply sat there looking at John with a serious expression. John felt a mix of anticipation and dread as he awaited Samwel's response. Finally, Samwel spoke, his voice lower and more somber than before. "My boy," Samwel said, his tone softening, "you've been like a younger brother to me. There's something I've been keeping from you. The wealth I have doesn't come from the scam I introduced you to. It comes from something much deeper, something that only those with a strong heart can handle." John's heart skipped a beat. He had always known there was more to Samwel than met the eye, but he never imagined it would be something so dark. Samwel continued, his gaze unwavering. "If you want to make the kind of money I'm making, there's someone I can take you to," Samwel said, his voice now tinged with gravity. "An old man who lives on the outskirts of town. He has the power to perform rituals that will make you wealthy, richer than you ever imagined. But it comes with a price. Think carefully before you make any decisions. If you're willing, I'll take you there." John sat in stunned silence. The words Samwel had just spoken felt like a punch to the gut. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Samwel, the man he had looked up to and admired, was involved in dark rituals to gain his wealth. John had heard stories of people who turned to native doctors only for their lives to end in misery, and the idea of such a path terrified him. Despite his envy of Samwel's life and the lure of wealth, John was not ready to sacrifice his future for a quick fix. He had heard enough to know that such a decision could ruin his life. But still the temptation lingered, gnawing at him. For days, John wrestled with his thoughts. The allure of instant wealth was tantalizing, but the fear of the unknown was a powerful force. In his confusion, he turned to the only person he could trust, his mother. He confided in her, telling her everything Samwel had revealed to him, the dark secret behind his wealth and the proposition to visit the old man for rituals. His mother listened quietly as John poured out his heart. She didn't interrupt, but when he finished, there was a long pause before she finally spoke. Madam Gloria was taken aback by John's hesitation, unable to comprehend why he was suddenly backing down from the decision they had made together. "What are you waiting for?" she asked, her voice firm yet filled with reassurance. "You need to follow Samwel to the barber. Don't be afraid, John. Samwel has undergone this ritual and he survived. You should be thankful that he's even willing to take you to the native doctor in the first place." Her words were filled with conviction, offering John a sense of comfort. With his mother's reassurance, John's mind was made up. Despite the fear lingering within him, he was ready to take the next step. The thought of becoming worthy, of finally living a life of affluence, drove him forward. The next morning, Samwel arrived, his demeanor more encouraging than ever. John shared his decision with him, confirming that he was ready to follow him to the shrine. Samwel smiled with approval. He had been waiting for this moment. True to his word, Samwel led John to the old man's shrine later that day. Upon their arrival, Samwel explained the purpose of their visit to the native doctor. The old man burst into a fit of wild laughter, speaking in a language that sounded like gibberish, as if communicating with spirits from another realm. His voice was erratic and his words were incoherent, filled with mysterious chants. After several moments of this strange behavior, the old man finally stopped and turned to John, his face becoming more serious. "My son," he began, his eyes piercing, "your desire to become a man of great wealth has been accepted by the great Ikuku. But first, are you ready to pay the price?" John's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't hesitate for a moment. "Yes, Baba," he answered, his voice steady but filled with determination. "I'm ready to pay any price to be worthy." His words were resolute, and for the first time the fear in his heart began to fade. He had made up his mind, and nothing could stop him now. The old man nodded approvingly, then continued, "I will perform some sacred rituals. You will lie in this coffin for 7 days. After the 7th day, you will be transformed. You will attract wealth in the same way that honey attracts flies." The idea of lying in a coffin for an entire week sent a chill down John's spine. He could feel his legs tremble with unease, but he remained resolute. He gripped the edge of the chair he was sitting on, trying to mask his anxiety. Samwel noticed his hesitation and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Don't be afraid, John," Samwel whispered softly. "I've gone through this ritual myself, and so have many of my rich friends. It will be over before you even realize it, and you'll be one of the big boys in no time." John's fear was still there, but he trusted Samwel. He knew that Samwel had already experienced this, and he wasn't about to let the opportunity slip away. With a deep breath, John stood up, his legs still shaky, and slowly walked towards the coffin. The native doctor handed him a concoction to drink. John took it, and within moments he fell into a deep, almost trance-like sleep. Samwel, knowing the ritual had begun, left the shrine and headed home. He would return after 7 days to bring John back. For the next 7 days, John remained in the coffin, undergoing the ritual. His body ached, and the eerie silence of the shrine weighed heavily on his mind. But on the 7th day, John was jolted awake, his body racked with severe pain. Every muscle felt heavy, and he could barely move. He felt weak and exhausted, as though every ounce of energy had been drained from him. True to his word, Samwel was there, right on time to carry John back home. Though John felt drained, there was a sense of excitement bubbling up inside him. He had made it through the ritual, and soon, he would be part of the wealthy elite, living a life he had always dreamed of. Before they left, the old man gave a final warning that would stay with John forever. "You must not come out at night," the native doctor instructed sternly. "Once the sun sets, you must lock yourself in a secure room and do not leave until the sun rises again. Once a week, you must lock something of value in your room with you. Do this, and you will see the wealth you command." John felt a wave of confusion and fear wash over him at the mention of locking something away in his room once a week. But Samwel, ever the guide, remained calm. The old man's warning, though cryptic, was part of the process, and Samwel had endured it himself. With heavy hearts, they began their silent journey back home. John's mind raced with thoughts of what he had just experienced and the future that lay ahead. Despite his weariness, there was a sense of anticipation building inside him. This was just the beginning, and he was determined to fulfill his end of the bargain. Once John and Samwel returned home after their visit to the native doctor, Samwel couldn't shake off the ominous warning the old man had given them. The condition to lock himself away every night after sunset and only emerge when the sun rose was unsettling. Samwel was deeply disturbed by the foreboding tone of the warning. He knew the old man's words carried weight, and he couldn't afford to ignore them. Despite his inner turmoil, Samwel quickly set into motion the plan they had discussed. He and John went out in search of a woman, as John had been instructed. The task was not difficult for Samwel. His wealth and presence made him irresistible to women, and it wasn't long before they found a beautiful young woman who was eager to spend the night with John. She followed them back to the house, blissfully unaware of the terrifying fate that awaited her. As night began to fall, John led the woman to his room. They locked the door behind them, as per the instructions from the old man. From the outside, Samwel stood still, watching the door. His heart raced, uncertain of what was unfolding behind it. To ease his nerves, he instructed everyone else in the house to go out to a nearby nightclub, leaving him alone with John and the woman. Inside, everything seemed normal. John and the woman spent time together and eventually fell asleep. However, as the hours ticked by, Samwel began to notice strange sounds emanating from the room. What began as low growls soon escalated into something much more horrifying. A piercing scream shattered the night. The woman inside the room with John was screaming. Samwel froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The scream was followed by more growling and sounds that made his blood run cold. He dared not open the door, fearing whatever was happening inside. The bizarre noises continued for what seemed like hours before they suddenly stopped. Samwel sighed with relief, but his mind raced, wondering what had occurred. He tried to calm himself, hoping it was just a figment of his imagination or perhaps the result of too much wine. But he couldn't shake the sense of dread that had settled over him. The following morning, Samwel mustered the courage to check on John. He slowly approached the door to John's room, his hands trembling as he reached for the doorknob. When the door finally creaked open, the sight before him was far worse than he had feared. John lay on the floor, exhausted and spent, while the room around him was in complete disarray. The walls were covered in blood and deep claw-like scratches marred the surfaces. It looked as though a wild animal had ransacked the room. But what troubled Samwel most was the absence of the woman. Her clothes had been torn to shreds, and there was no trace of her anywhere. Only the remnants of her torn clothes remained as evidence that she had been there. A chill ran down Samwel's spine as he realized the horrific truth. Whatever had taken place in that room last night had taken her. Despite the terrifying scene, Samwel couldn't help but notice the piles of money scattered throughout the room. There were bills from all over the world, confirming that John's financial fortune had finally arrived. For a moment, Samwel was elated for his friend. He had seen firsthand the consequences of the ritual, and now John was living the life of his dreams. He could buy anything he wanted, and respect followed him wherever he went. Women flocked to him, and he was able to send money home to his mother, making her proud. Yet, amidst the wealth and success, John was a deeply troubled man. Every night he locked himself in his room, but when morning came, the room was always in chaos. It looked as though a violent creature had torn through everything. The room was filled with blood, and the woman who had spent the night with him was nowhere to be found. John began to piece the unsettling truth together. He was the one turning into the beast. The creature that was wreaking havoc in his room was him. Every night he lost control, and every morning he woke up to find the horrifying aftermath of his transformation. This realization filled John with dread. The wealth and the luxuries were no longer worth the price he had paid. He was living a nightmare, and he feared the monster he was becoming. Yet, despite his terror, there was no escaping the dark pact he had made. As the days passed, the realization sank deeper. He had sacrificed his humanity for wealth, and now he was bound to the beast within him forever. John's heart raced with fear and confusion as he grappled with the terrifying realization of what he had become. Despite the wealth and success that had seemingly fallen into his lap, a deep dread began to take root inside him. The wealth so easily obtained was coming at a terrible cost. Lives were being lost, and John had no idea how to stop the monstrous transformation that gripped him every night. Desperate for answers and feeling increasingly overwhelmed by his actions, he decided to visit his mother, Madam Gloria, in the village. When Madam Gloria saw her son, she was overjoyed to witness his sudden prosperity. She had long dreamed of this day, and now her prayers seemed to have been answered. Her son, once struggling, had now become a man of wealth and influence. Proudly, she called up relatives and friends, eager to show off her successful child. Little did she know, behind John's seemingly innocent demeanor was something far darker, a beast waiting to be unleashed. John was filled with guilt and horror, but the more he tried to suppress his growing fear, the more the monstrous force inside him seemed to take control. The nightmarish events of his past few days haunted him, and he had no answers. He could no longer ignore the warning signs, nor could he continue living in denial about what he was becoming. In the quiet of his mother's home, he sought solace and comfort, hoping that the familiar surroundings of his childhood would bring him peace. But even as he tried to smile and enjoy the attention his mother showered upon him, he could feel the beast within stirring, ready to strike again. What would become of John and his mother in the days to come? Would John ever be able to control the monster inside him, or would it eventually consume him entirely? With a heavy heart and mind full of unanswered questions, John could only wait and dread what would come next. As he sat in silence, the storm inside him seemed to grow ever closer, threatening to tear his world apart. The fate of John and Madam Gloria remained uncertain. The horrors of the past and the fear of what might happen in the future weighed heavily on them both. How would John come to terms with the consequences of his actions? Would he ever be free of the curse that bound him, or was he doomed to live as a creature of the night, forever hunted by his own darkness? The chilling journey had only just begun, and the answers were waiting to unfold.